The Taurus G3c, let's check it out. Taurus has been around for a long time, and one of the things about Taurus is that it is a very reasonably priced firearm, and yet they have decent quality. Starting out with the G2C and also the TX22, and then they came out with the G3. Now, we've done a review on this recently, and guys, I'm telling you, Taurus has really stepped up their game. There is a lot of people that are buying this because it's just an excellent shooting handgun. But now we're going to take a look at the new G3C, and this is an upgrade over the G2C. There's a lot of things that they've upgraded on this pistol. And guys, if you're looking for that concealed carry option and you're on a budget, this is one to take a look at. And I want to thank Taurus for sending the G3C for this test and evaluation. These are pretty hard to get right now. They've just been released. And so we're going to take a good look at the G3C. Guys, to be just perfectly honest, I was pretty impressed with the G2C. And then when they came out with the G3, I just felt like it was a bigger brother to the G2C. So when the G3 came out, it really solved some of the problems that I was seeing with the G2C. I still think it's a solid handgun, but I think there's some things about the G3C that address that. Let's go ahead and drop the magazine, make sure it's unloaded. We do have a 12+1 magazine, and not only one, but you get 3 magazines, which obviously are all 12 rounders. They're steel magazines, they're really good quality. These fit your standard G2C, they'll fit the PT Millennium Pro, and also the G3 magazines will fit in your G3C and your G2C. It does stick out just a little bit, but this gives you some extra round capacity, which I really like. And I've heard that Taurus is actually coming out with a higher capacity magazine at some point. But guys, one of the big things about the Taurus is it's just a super popular handgun, and a lot of that has to do with the price. These are very reasonably priced. This runs $305.74. Manufacturer suggested retail, so you're probably looking at getting this for around the $250 to $275 range, which is fantastic. And that's, again, one of the reasons why it's so popular, because this is a very affordable pistol. Now, in the past, Taurus has had some issues, but these are actually made in Georgia. In fact, I believe it says on here Brainridge, Georgia. They've moved a manufacturing facility there, and even the ones that were made in Miami, I feel like that the quality for Taurus has really stepped up since they've moved some of that production out of Brazil. And guys, from all the experience we've had so far, starting out with the G2C, the TX22, the G3, now the G3C, I feel like Taurus is really going in a solid direction. Now, this is a polymer frame striker fire pistol. It does have second strike capability, and that means if you pull the trigger on a dead round, with most polymer frame pistols, you're just stuck. I mean, you have to rack the slide again to make sure the round fires. With the G3, and for that matter the G2C, it does have it where you can pull the trigger again if there is a light primer strike or if the ammunition, it just didn't function right. And so it gives you that added capability, which I really like. Again, it is 12+1 in the magazine, so you have a really good size. And with some of the subcompacts, with the SIG P365 and the Springfield Armory Hellcat, this is very comparable. In fact, here I have one of the Springfield Armory Hellcats. This is 11+1. We're going to drop our magazine, make sure the gun is unloaded. We have just a little bit of longer slide length, and then here at the base it's just a touch longer as well, but we're getting 12 rounds instead of 11 rounds. Of course, there is an extension, but that will push it on down a little bit more. The big thing with the Springfield Armory is it's thinner. you have a thinner profile, and so it's going to make it a little bit better for concealed carry. My P365 is actually on loan to a buddy of mine who was trying to decide if he was wanting to buy one. I just don't have it back. So it's a little smaller than the Springfield, but you're getting 10+1 with the SIG. And yes, I hit my thumb with a hammer. But to be honest with you guys, the G3c has less muzzle flip. And that's one of the things at the range that really surprised me. But with the G2c, it was the same. It's a little heavier. Here is the G2c. We're going to be looking at some comparisons because that's really what this is about. The G2c has been an extremely popular handgun with Taurus, and again, because of the price. One of the big things, though, is if you'll notice on the G2c, it has kind of more of an oxide or a parkerized finish, and it wears. You can see it's already starting to wear right here. And so this is going to, get worse as it continues on. But with the G3c, this is a tenifer finish, so it's impregnated into the metal. It's going to give it a much longer lasting, durable finish than your G3c. Another thing they've done is they've added front cocking serrations, and they've eliminated this cutout with the G2c. Now we have it just like the G3, which actually comes out. And then here on the top, you can see the loaded chamber indicator on the G2c. They've done away with that on the G3c, and you just have a visual port to look down to see if it's loaded. And then when it comes to the sights, we have a 3-dot sight. It is fully adjustable on the G2c. On the G3, these are steel sights. It's a blacked out rear and then just a white dot at the front. Really easy to pick up. But one thing that's really cool about the G3c is that these are Glock sight compatible. So you can put any of your Glock sights on this pistol. Night sights, fiber optics, whatever, the choices are unlimited. Now the serrations are definitely deeper on the G3. I mean, they've enhanced that, a little bit shallow on the G2c. Then we have our front cocking serrations again that are abbreviated, but they're still pretty deep. Another big change is the grip, and we have an extended thumb rest right here that's on both sides. And then the texturing is a little bit more coarse on the G2c. With the G3, it's a little bit finer. It's still a really exceptional gripping surface, but it's not as uncomfortable. Now I like the G2c, I like the gripping on it, but I think the G3 has a definite improvement with just a little bit of a finer texturing. Another thing you'll notice is that here on the magazine there's a little divot cut out that's absent on the G2, and this allows you to be able to get those magazines out. You can get a hold of it right here and be able to pull those out in case you have some kind of malfunction or you need to really get those mags out. But either way, they throw out of that mag well. Here we have our mag release, and it is switchable to the other side. And then of course you have your standard takedown levers that are very much like the Glock. We'll look at that when we break it down. Now it does have the safety, and that's one thing that some people really don't like, to have that frame safety on the outside, but that's what you have. Then we have our slide stop right here in front of it. One thing that I've noticed that's pretty minor though is the serial number comes through the frame right here above your trigger. On the G2 it does not. It does come below the accessory rail on both of them, and both have the accessory rail which you can put a lot of different lights and lasers. It does give you a decent grip on the pistol, especially with this little bit of step in the finger on the end of the magazine. The bore axis is fairly low. Not quite like a Glock, but not too much different. I mean, it is pretty low. This is the G43X, and guys, there's really not a lot of difference. It's a pretty low bore axis. But now one big difference to me, and something that needed to be done, was the trigger. On the G2c, it does have a blade trigger, but when you depress it, it doesn't depress all the way into the trigger. You can still feel the blade right there on the G2c. On the G3, it depresses into the trigger. It's a little bit wider, a little bit flatter. And so it gives you a little more surface to grab hold of, and it doesn't make it uncomfortable like the G2. Now on the G2c, the trigger, you have that take up right there. It's a long pull all the way back. And guys, really you have kind of a mushy break. And I mentioned that in the first video when we did the G2c. With the G3, we have take up here. There's some resistance, so you're still getting pretty much a long trigger pull, but it's a lot more crisp. The break is cleaner. And the reset is really fast. And so I was able to really get fast shots. One thing you don't want to do with these pistols is to slap the trigger, because if you do, you got to pull it all the way back. It's a little more difficult. This to me is an important gun to set that reset and to fire that short stroke, and it definitely helps. Make sure the gun is unloaded with our Lyman trigger gauge from Brownells. 4 pounds, 6.5 ounces. 4 pounds, 14.6 ounces. Now the dimensions on the G2c, G3c are pretty much identical. I mean, this is just an upgraded G2c into the G3 line. So everything's pretty much the same. The pistol itself is 6.3 inches in overall length. It's 5.1 inches in height, and it's 1.2 inches in width, and that has a lot to do with the controls. Weight on the G3c, 1 pound, 5.8 ounces. Weight on the Springfield Armory Hellcat, 1 pound, 2.2 ounces. Weight on the Taurus G3, full size, 1 pound, 8.6 ounces. Now with the G3, I wanted to compare the G2c just to show you the difference. Of course, shorter in length. This is just going to be a much more concealable handgun. You get 17 plus 1 in the G3. Guys, honestly, I have been very impressed with this handgun. And this is my shop gun. I keep it out here for self-defense, along with my concealed carry, of course. But this makes just an excellent concealed carry option. And then with 12 and plus 1, I mean, it gives you a lot of capacity as well. I want to thank Fiocchi for sponsoring the ammo. Shooting some 115 grain full metal jacket right here, made in the USA. Also, it's nice to have these 3 extra magazines. And I brought one of the G2s down just to have 4. And these Lula loaders are beautiful. So we shot about 400 rounds down at the range, and immediately I could tell a big difference with the trigger. The trigger is a lot better, it's a lot more crisp. You don't feel the blade on your finger like you do the G2c. And so it just had a great reset. I mean, it just kept them on target. And so I was able to shoot steel, rubber dummies with ease. The texture on the grip is nice. It's not uncomfortable, even though it does have the laser etching. And that little finger rest is perfect. Just get your trigger finger out of the way. Sights show up really well with the dot at the front and then the blacked out at the rear. So whether shooting rapid or just steady, we had 0 malfunctions. It just ran, just like the G2c. I mean, honestly, taking it to the range, it's just really a pleasure to shoot. There were no hot spots. There was nothing really that I didn't like about it. I mean, it just seemed to hold in well. It didn't have a lot of muzzle rise or muzzle flip. The recoil was nice, and it gave you a little more grip than some of the smaller subcompacts. And so that was nice as well, especially when you're concealed carrying and you need to pull it out. You've got a good firm grip, and yet it's a fairly small handgun. Disassembly, drop our magazine, check to make sure the gun's unloaded. We're going to bring it back and pull down our tabs, and then we need to pull the trigger to release the slide. We have our recoil spring, barrel, and guys, it's just a standard polymer frame striker fire pistol. I mean, all the controls are pretty much the same as you would in many of your striker fire pistols. Here you can see a little bit of the finish. I mean, it's very well finished and very well done, exactly like the G2c. I lined them up and they're pretty close to all the internals. You have a dual captive metal guide rod, and the barrel is 3.2 inches in length. Nice polished feed ramp. And guys, we didn't have any malfunctions whatsoever. And guys, that's all you need to do to field strip. Just bring in your barrel, recoil spring and guide rod, bring it over the frame, test for function, and we're good to go. Now, we've already talked about price, but $305.74 is the manufacturer suggested retail. That's going to bring this handgun into a very reasonable price in market price, probably around between $250 and $275 according to where you're buying it from. Plus they have a limited lifetime warranty on these firearms. Pros and cons, let's start out with pros. I think the big pro here is that it's a very reasonably priced firearm. And just like the G3c, which was also very reasonable in price, this has some upgraded features that you're really not going to pay a lot more for. It does come with 3 magazines, has very ample stippling on the grip. The trigger pull, is not bad. Has a much better brake than the G3c. We have Glock compatible sights. We have front and rear cocking serrations. There's a lot of things about this handgun to me that bring it up into, compare with about any firearm. It's very reliable. We're shooting a little bit low and definitely very respectable. You have your accessory rail on a subcompact type pistol, which makes it nice. And it does compare. It's a little bit larger than your P365 or your Hellcat. It's a little bit thicker, but really overall it's not that much different in silhouette. So this is a very concealable handgun, and one again that you don't have to worry about. Make an excellent truck gun, make an excellent concealed carry option. As far as cons go, Taurus has had their issues in the past, but I think that they've overcome it. Now you won't know that from the comments on Instagram or even here. A lot of people are just down on Taurus. And guys, to be honest with you, I have not been a huge Taurus fan for a number of years. Until just recently, they have really stepped up their game. They're putting out some good quality firearms. But really, to me, that's probably the only con, especially since they've moved to this tenifer finish, because it definitely protects the finish of your firearm slide. So guys, if you're looking for a budget-friendly, good quality concealed carry option piece, I think the G3c, it just checks off all the boxes. And guys, I'm telling you, with the G3, excellent firearm. Even the G3c, to me, was a great little handgun. But with the upgrades, the G3c, to me, is a better choice. And again, we want to thank Taurus for sending the G3c for this test and evaluation. Rubber Dummies is one of the best training tools on the market. And you get a 10% discount using Suit00 when you click the link down in the description. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. Taurus G3c, let's check it out. Whoops. We shot about 400 rounds down here at the range, and just like the G3, and honestly just like the